Have you ever been on the verge of something great and suddenly found a way to make it fall apart? A promotion you quietly undermined? A relationship that was going well until you pushed it away? A creative project that was finally working, and then you stopped showing up for it? A version of yourself that was beginning to emerge, and something inside you said, "Not yet, not you, not this." 3-second pause. Most people call this self-sabotage. They blame their discipline, their willpower, their focus. But Carl Jung had a different explanation, one that goes far deeper than habits or motivation. He believed that many of us are not afraid of failure. We are afraid of success. Not because we don't want it, but because somewhere inside us, brilliance feels dangerous. Pause. Music shifts, slightly warmer. In our last video, we explored the shadow, the parts of ourselves we buried because the world rejected them. Today we go deeper into something Jung called the golden shadow. The part of you that isn't dark, that isn't wounded, that isn't broken. The part that is extraordinary and that you have been hiding, sometimes your entire life. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. If you have ever felt the strange discomfort of being seen, praised, or recognized, if success. Before we go into the golden shadow, let's take a moment to ground ourselves in what we already know. In the last video, we explored Jung's concept of the shadow, the unconscious repository of everything we were taught to suppress, hide, or deny about ourselves. Our anger, our neediness, our jealousy, our fear. Everything the environment around us, family, school, culture, told us was unacceptable got pushed into the shadow. And there it stayed. Hidden, but not inactive. The shadow doesn't disappear when we bury it. It simply operates from the dark, projecting onto others, driving our choices, running our lives while we sleep. Pause. But here is something crucial that most conversations about the shadow miss entirely. Jung was very clear. The shadow is not only the dark, it holds everything that was rejected. And that includes things that were rejected not because they were destructive, but because they were too bright, too threatening, too powerful, too much for the people around us, for the version of ourselves we were allowed to be. The two faces of the shadow. Think of the shadow as having two chambers. The first chamber holds what we might call the dark gold, rage, lust, grief, the capacity for cruelty, qualities that, when integrated, give us strength, boundaries, and authenticity. The second chamber holds what Jung called the golden shadow, our unrealized gifts, our suppressed brilliance, our unlived potential. Both chambers shape your life. Both need to be faced. And today we are opening the second one. The golden shadow is the collection of your greatest qualities, your intelligence, your creativity, your leadership, your depth, your sensitivity, your power, that were buried not because they were bad, but because they were not safe to express. Let that land for a moment. Not because they were bad, because they were not safe. How the gold gets buried. The burying begins early. Maybe you were a child who was naturally gifted, and you learned that being too smart made you a target. So you started getting answers wrong on purpose. You dimmed yourself to fit in. Maybe you had a natural gift for leadership, and the adults around you called it bossy, difficult, too much. So you stepped back. You learned to follow even when you could see more clearly. Maybe you were deeply sensitive and emotionally intelligent, and the people around you called it weakness, so you hardened. You built walls. You learned to perform toughness. And now, decades later, you wonder why you feel disconnected from yourself. Why success feels hollow. Why you keep stopping just before the finish line. Why you feel like you are living someone else's life. The projection of the gold here is where the golden shadow becomes most visible, in the people we admire, the ones we put on pedestals, the ones we follow obsessively online, the ones we think are just built differently. Jung would ask a very different question about that admiration. He would say, what if the quality you are so in awe of in that person is actually yours? What if the reason their brilliance moves you so deeply is not because it belongs to them, but because it resonates with something dormant inside you that has been waiting for years to be allowed out. Admiration becomes projection when it is accompanied by a quiet sense of impossibility. They can do it, but I could never. I could never. That is the golden shadow speaking. What we envy in others is what we have disowned in ourselves. There is a price to keeping your gold in the shadow. When your greatest gifts go unlived, they do not simply stay quiet. They turn into longing, into restlessness, into a persistent sense that something is missing, even when everything on paper looks fine. They turn into resentment toward people who are living what you haven't allowed yourself to live. They turn into depression, which Jung understood not as a chemical malfunction but often as the psyche's protest against an unlived life. Depression is like a woman in black. If she turns up, don't shoo her away. Invite her in, offer her a seat, treat her like a guest and listen to what she has to say. Your unlived potential is knocking, and if you don't answer the door willingly, it will find other ways to get your attention. So if the golden shadow holds our gifts, our actual strengths, our real potential, why on earth would we be afraid of it? Why would anyone run from their own brilliance? The answer is more layered than it might seem. Reason 1. Visibility means vulnerability. When you play small, you are safe. No one can criticize what you never fully attempted. No one can take away what you never fully claimed. Staying hidden is a protection strategy, and at some point in your life, it was a very smart one. The child who was mocked for being too enthusiastic learned, don't show too much. It will be used against you. The teenager who was punished for outshining a parent learned, shrink yourself to keep the peace. These were rational adaptations to real situations. The tragedy is that the strategy outlived the situation. The danger is gone, but the habit of hiding remains. Reason 2, you might lose your people. There is a deeply human fear underneath ambition and self-expression. If I become too much, I will be abandoned. This fear is not irrational. It has roots. In many families and communities, there is an unspoken rule. Don't rise too far above the group. Success can feel like betrayal, like leaving people behind, like saying I am more than what we agreed I was. So you unconsciously put a ceiling on yourself, not because you can't go higher, but because going higher feels like a kind of exile. You shrink to stay connected. You hide to stay loved. Reason 3, the weight of potential. Here is a fear that rarely gets named directly. If you fully own your gifts, if you truly accept that you are capable of what you secretly believe you are, then you no longer have an excuse. You can no longer say, I just haven't found my thing yet. You can no longer wait for the right moment, the right circumstances, the right version of yourself. Owning your potential means owning your responsibility to act on it. And that is terrifying. Because what if you try, fully, completely, with everything you have, and it still isn't enough? Jung understood this fear intimately. He called the avoidance of one's own potential a form of spiritual cowardice, not in a judgmental sense, but in the sense that it requires a kind of courage to be fully yourself. A courage that most people are never explicitly invited to develop. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Reason 4, identity disruption. When you have spent years, or decades, identifying as someone who is not particularly talented, not particularly gifted, not particularly special, claiming your gold disrupts the entire story. It is not just a change in behavior. It is a change in identity. And the psyche resists identity change with enormous force, even when the new identity is better, even when it is truer. Because the old story, however limiting, is known. It is familiar. It is safe in its own constrained way. The new story requires you to meet a version of yourself you have never fully inhabited. That is not comfortable. That is transformation. Now we can talk about self-sabotage with real clarity, not as a character flaw, not as a failure of discipline, but as exactly what it is. The golden shadow protecting itself from being exposed. The mechanics of self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is not random. It follows a pattern. It almost always activates at the threshold, the moment just before a breakthrough, just before the launch, just before the conversation that would change everything, just before you fully commit. And at that threshold, the shadow moves. Suddenly, you are too tired. Suddenly, there is a conflict that demands your attention. Suddenly, you find reasons why now is not the right time. Suddenly, you do something, consciously or not, that pulls you back from the edge. This is not weakness. This is an unconscious protection system running exactly as it was programmed. Programmed by every moment in your past when being visible brought pain, when being too good brought consequences, when shining brought punishment. The most common forms. Self-sabotage wears many faces. Procrastination, staying perpetually in preparation, never quite arriving at execution, waiting for a readiness that the shadow ensures never fully comes. Perfectionism, raising the bar so impossibly high that anything short of flawless justifies stopping. The pursuit of perfection as a sophisticated form of avoidance, minimizing, deflecting every compliment, qualifying every achievement, ensuring that recognition never fully lands. It wasn't that impressive. Anyone could have done it. I just got lucky. Overextension, filling your calendar so completely that your most important work never gets the space it needs. Staying genuinely busy to avoid the terrifying quiet of your own creative depth. Imposter syndrome, the persistent belief that you don't actually belong in the room, that you have somehow fooled everyone, that the truth of your inadequacy is about to be revealed, when in reality the shadow is simply protecting the gold by convincing you it isn't there. The uncomfortable truth about imposter syndrome. Here is something worth sitting with. Imposter syndrome is often described as a belief that you are less capable than others think you are, but Jung would reframe it entirely. Imposter syndrome is frequently the golden shadow speaking from the other direction. You feel like an imposter not because you are incompetent, but because you are not yet fully inhabiting your actual competence. There is a gap between who you are performing and who you actually are, and that gap creates the feeling of fraud. The solution is not to lower others' expectations of you. It is to raise your own inhabitation of yourself. The most common form of despair is not being who you are. So how do you reclaim what has been buried? How do you begin to inhabit the parts of yourself that the world and your own protective mechanisms have kept in the shadow? Jung's answer was not a quick fix. It was a practice, a direction, a way of relating to yourself differently. Step 1. Follow the admiration. Begin by paying careful attention to what moves you in others. Not casual admiration, deep admiration. The kind that stirs something uncomfortable alongside the appreciation. The speaker who makes you think, I wish I could do that. The writer whose work makes your chest tight. The leader whose presence makes you feel both inspired and somehow smaller. Write those qualities down. Be specific. Then ask the question Jung would ask, where does this quality live in me? Not whether you have it perfectly expressed, not whether you have performed it yet. Simply, is this in me? Has it ever appeared, even briefly, even partially? Almost always the answer is yes. Step 2. Notice the ceiling. Pay attention to where you put an invisible ceiling on yourself. Where do you consistently stop just short of fully claiming something? Where do you hedge, qualify, minimize, or deflect when someone recognizes something real in you? That ceiling is not humility. True humility does not require you to deny what is genuinely true about you. That ceiling is the golden shadow's way of keeping you safe inside familiar limits. And noticing it, with curiosity rather than judgment, is the beginning of dissolving it. Step 3. Tolerate being seen. This is perhaps the most practically difficult step. Practice receiving recognition without immediately deflecting it. When someone says your work is genuinely good, resist the reflex to minimize. Let the words actually land. When an opportunity appears that matches your real capabilities, resist the reflex to find a reason why you're not ready. Sit with the discomfort of readiness. When you complete something you are proud of, resist the reflex to immediately focus on what could be better. Allow yourself the full experience of having done it. None of this is comfortable at first. The nervous system has been trained to treat visibility as danger. Retraining it requires repetition, patience, and a willingness to feel the discomfort without immediately running from it. Step 4. Create containers for your gold. Gold needs a place to be expressed, an environment where it is not just tolerated but actively welcomed. This might mean finding creative practices that have no audience and no pressure, spaces where you can express your gifts purely for the experience of expression. It might mean seeking out communities where your particular kind of brilliance is recognized and valued, rather than threatening. It might mean working with a therapist or mentor who can witness your gold without flinching, someone who can hold space for you to be more than you have allowed yourself to be. Step 5. Rewrite the story. At some point, the work becomes about narrative. The old story, I am someone who is not particularly special, who is safe or small, who risks too much by shining, needs to be consciously examined and consciously replaced, not with toxic positivity, not with grandiosity, but with accuracy. A story that says, I have real gifts. I have been afraid of them. I am no longer willing to let that fear make my choices for me. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The golden shadow, when integrated, does not make you arrogant. It makes you whole. It makes you someone who no longer needs to diminish others because they are no longer diminishing themselves. It makes you someone whose light, finally owned, finally expressed, becomes available to you and to everyone around you. We have covered a lot of ground today. We talked about the part of you that is not wounded, not dark, not broken, but brilliant. And we talked about why that brilliance for so many of us is the most frightening thing of all. I want to leave you with something simple. The world does not need a dimmer version of you. The people in your life do not actually benefit from you playing small. And the version of yourself that you keep postponing, the one that is fully expressed, fully present, fully alive, that version is not a fantasy. It is who you already are, underneath the protection. What you can do right now. First, identify your golden admiration. Think of one person whose specific quality you deeply admire and feel you could never match. Write it down. Then write, this is also in me in some form. Second, find your ceiling. Notice where you consistently stop yourself just before fully claiming something. Don't judge it, just see it. Awareness is the beginning of choice. Third, practice receiving. The next time someone genuinely recognizes something in you, let it land. Just for a moment. Don't deflect. Don't minimize. Simply say thank you, and let it be true. A final word: Jung believed that the greatest act of courage available to a human being is not to face external danger, but to face yourself. To look at what you have buried, both the dark and the gold, and to say, all of this is mine. I am willing to carry all of it. That willingness is not a destination. It is a daily practice. And every time you choose it, every time you let yourself be a little more seen, a little more expressed, a little more whole, you are doing the work that Jung spent his entire life pointing toward. The work of becoming who you actually are. If this video brought something up in you, a quality you've been hiding, a gift you've been afraid to claim, I want to hear about it in the comments. Be as specific or as general as you want to be. But name it, because naming it is the first act of reclaiming it. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Every week on this channel, we go deeper into the map of the unconscious, and what we find there always turns out to be more useful than we expected. Leave a like if this video was worth your time. It helps the channel reach the people who need it most. And tell me in the comments, what is one quality you have been afraid to fully own? What is your gold? In our next video, we are going to explore something that sits right at the intersection of everything we have covered so far. We talked about the shadow. We talked about projection. We talked about the patterns we repeat in love. Now we are going to talk about what happens when all of that unprocessed material, the wounds, the buried gold, the unlived life, finds its way into addiction. Not just addiction to substances, but the addictions that are harder to name, to approval, to chaos, to emotional intensity, to people who are never quite available. Jung had a perspective on addiction that the medical world is only now beginning to catch up with. And it starts with a question that will stay with you long after this video ends. Don't miss it.